Welcome to a new week here on the Retirement Quick Tips podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Micciche. This week on the podcast, I'm diving into the One Big Beautiful Bill, which recently passed the House and Senate and was signed into law on July 4th. Now, lots of changes with this new bill, and particularly with taxes. One of the primary things that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act did was that it extended the reductions in tax rates that were part of the original Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Those were extended and made permanent. Previously, those were going to expire at the end of this year. And so without this bill, tax rates would have gone higher for quite a few Americans. So that was kind of the main thing trying to push through, but then got a lot more complicated. Now, there's too much to go over in the podcast, and it'll probably bore you to death. But what I'll try to do this week is talk about the provisions in this act that I think are going to have the biggest impact for the core group of you listening, which is those of you who are getting close to and living in retirement. So I mentioned the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the extension of those tax rates from that. Also, some changes to standard deductions, child tax credits, estate and gift tax exclusions. Those were also set to expire after this year. The SALT, state and local tax deduction, that's what SALT stands for. The cap was raised, but temporarily. So one of the key takeaways as I'm reading through the provisions, the key provisions of this act, is that things are pretty complicated. So I would say more complexity. Unfortunately, that's not what we want when it comes to taxes. The simpler, the better. And one of the things I loved with the original Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is that it created a much higher standard deduction. And so it made taxes simpler for so many millions of Americans who could just take the standard deduction. They didn't have to itemize, and it made doing their taxes a bit easier. But unfortunately, with the One Big Beautiful Bill, what I notice when I read through many of these provisions is that it adds a layer of complexity. There's new deductions, there's phase out rules, there's different effective dates. A lot of these changes are temporary. So, for example, you hear one of the main campaign promises from Trump is that no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. So he was able to fulfill that campaign promise with this new One Big Beautiful Bill. Basically, you have a deduction for tips and for overtime pay, but that expires at the end of 2028. And there's several provisions that are just temporary. Another one, which is key, and I'll talk about in more detail, is the tax deduction for seniors age 65 and over. So that's going to impact a lot of you. But again, that one's also temporary, and it's only a few years. So I'm really looking forward to diving into these changes coming up with the One Big Beautiful Bill. I hope that after the end of this week, you better understand what this means for you and how to apply some of these key provisions and understand how it's going to impact you and your own tax financial situation. Also, if you're new to the podcast, a little bit about me. I'm a financial advisor and co-owner of True North Retirement Advisors, a fee-only fiduciary financial advisory practice managing over $425 million in client assets. For the last 17 years, I've helped clients retire with confidence, and my goal on this podcast is to simplify all the complexities of retirement planning so that you can focus on what really matters, enjoying your retirement years while maintaining financial security. One last thing I want to talk about this week as a disclaimer is that I'm going to talk about a lot of tax changes, but it is important. This podcast is not tax advice. I am not a tax advisor. So I'm going to do the best I can with the limitations that I have in that role to convey to you what I understand from this bill as best as possible, some of the practical considerations. But of course, it is very important that when you're applying these changes, these tax changes in your own life, that you consult with your own tax advisor, your own financial advisor, other advisors, estate planning attorneys, etc. All right, that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Come on back tomorrow. I'm going to tackle what I think is the real impact of the one big beautiful bill that's going to impact everybody, and no one is talking about it. All right, my name is Ashley Micciche, and this is the Retirement Quick Tips Podcast.